PPRC would like to begin this presentation by acknowledging that our offices located in Ottawa and our meeting today are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to a time immemorial. We recognize the Algonquin people as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. So, today's theme is in celebration of the National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Thank you all to all of our consultants for wearing their lighted up shirts to show their support. Disability is often left out of the business conversation about diversity and inclusion. It needs to be part of the conversation. We have invited Wanda Deschamps to share her story of undiagnosed autism and how this realization at midlife placed her on a mission to increase the participation level of the neurodiverse population in the workforce as part of a greater overall disability inclusion. Wanda Deschamps is the founder and principal of Liberty Co., a consultancy working to increase the participation level of the neurodiverse population in the workforce with a special emphasis on autism due to Wanda's own diagnosis at midlife. A champion for inclusion, she enjoys speaking and writing under the banner of the #Inclusion Revolution, a worldwide movement launched in 2018 to spearhead broader thinking about disability, especially disability employment. She is also the catalyst behind the #Women for Women collective focused on gender equality through supporting other women. Combining these two goals provides an avenue for Wanda to be an advocate for women with autism, including as a participant in research into autistic women's experiences in the workplace. Outside of work, she relishes time with her family and friends, following the Pittsburgh Penguins, exercising and reading biographies, as well as books about history and current affairs. One avenue that allows her to indulge her love of learning is as a member of the Charity Reports Literacy Circle review panel. Wanda lives in Waterloo with her husband and 2 sons. And I will let you take it away, Wanda.
Thank you so much, Rowan. Thank you for such kind words and for providing that introduction. And actually, through your land acknowledgement, you gave me a segue to say that I'm on the Haldeman Tract. So I'm on the land promised to the 6 nations, including 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. And it's actually the inequalities caused by colonialism and other forms of systemic oppression that motivate me to turn this injustice to action by supporting all historically marginalized groups, including Indigenous peoples and including the disability population of which I'm a member. And I officially became a member of the disability population when I received my diagnosis of autism at midlife. Although now I know I was born autistic, and I've been a member of the disability population my entire life. And when I share this, sometimes people ask, you were diagnosed at midlife. Didn't you know during your life up to that point that you were different? And I say that I did feel that I was different, and actually I was different. I attributed mainly these differences to my family, differences in my family from my peers and other aspects of my environment. So I came from a big family. I was the youngest of 10 children, and my parents were both strong advocates for gender equality. They were well educated and well traveled. So I was different from my peers and classmates. And I noticed beginning in elementary school that I did often struggle interacting with my classmates. And unfortunately, because of this, I was a target for teasing and bullying. And so to help combat this, I copied behaviors of other children, especially popular students and especially girls, in order to help me fit in. And I realize now, looking back, that what I was doing is I was actually masking my autistic characteristics and traits in an attempt to belong. And this practice actually worked to a degree, because by junior high and high school, I was able to fit in more, although I still struggled socially at times, and I struggled academically as well. Although by around high school, my marks did improve, and I was able to focus on subjects that I was interested in, as well as register for subject tracks that suited my abilities. So my home and my personal life was stressful during high school, actually beginning in elementary school, junior high, and through high school. But despite it all, I persevered, and I graduated from high school in 1988. And I entered university the following year, and I pursued a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology with a minor in history. And I noticed I had a wide range of my marks, and this troubled me. And I entered counseling with a psychologist for that reason and for other reasons, including stress within my family and my own anxiety. However, autism never crossed my mind, and it never crossed anyone else's mind. And this was a reflection of the overall environment in the late 80s and 90s. And in fact, the term neurodiversity, which I use and was coined by Australian sociologist Judy Singer, did actually not come to be until the 90s. So we weren't talking about autism in the 80s and the early 90s, and especially not in girls and women. So back to my story. After university, I attended business college, 92 to 93, and I performed well with the exception of one course. I struggled, but generally I performed well. And I noticed that my attentiveness to detail was rewarded. And I frankly welcomed straightforward yes and no answers because the dubiety of university arts curriculum was difficult for me. So this straightforward approach was a relief. I began my career in the charitable sector. And I was in the charitable sector actually for almost 25 years. And I progressed over that time. And in the 90s, I got married, I got divorced, and then I met my current husband, and we got married and we started a family. And it was like from the outside looking in, we had everything. And if you ask people who knew me during that time, they would probably say Wanda and Ryan appeared like they had everything. However, there was something always gnawing at me. And when I was 40, we relocated to the prairies, and I presented a happy face consistently. However, I can, looking back, only describe that time as complete upheaval. Our older son was diagnosed with autism the first winter we were in Saskatchewan. And around that time, I noticed significant work challenges for me. And there was always two sides to the story. And outside, I was successful. I had entered the most senior position of my career, and I was receiving recognition, especially for my subject matter knowledge and application. And then on the other hand, and on the inside, I was highly anxious, often confused and unsure about how I came across. In some contexts, I noticed that I had to work very hard to connect with some people, and I struggled to communicate. And one example for you, so you understand, is by attaching words to concepts. I did notice that I preferred discussion focused on high level, shall we say, strategy. I detested office gossip and petty politics, and I became frustrated when ideas that I thought were basic were not followed through or understood, even in fundamental ways. Deep down, I actually thought I was stupid, and this is rooted in what I shared with you. So struggling academically around junior high, when I floundered in some courses, that really stayed with me. And I would ask myself, if I'm stupid and I understand this, why do others not? And so I'm sharing this with you because I want you to get a sense of why I had some barriers in working relationships and how those barriers presented themselves. And the reality is that either individually or combined, these factors led me to be completely misunderstood on occasion, despite my intentions, which I knew deep down were good. And remember, I'd relocated with my family. So I was meeting and interacting with all kinds of new people. And I noticed a stark contrast between people who really approached me with an open mind, did not prejudge, did not succumb to biases, and those who really wanted me and us to be successful, and those who prejudged, succumbed to biases, and meaning that they mistook my intentions, or worse, projected intentions on me that I did not even have. So it was a stressful work life, and it was a stressful home life. And in the midst of all of this, I enrolled in my Master's of Arts in History at the University of Regina on a part-time basis in 2013, and then on a full-time basis the following year when I had left my job. I entered counseling again. I was a full-time student, and I noticed that I was really anxious. And the counseling did help. However, again, autism never crossed my mind, and it never crossed my health professional's mind. And the student side was certainly not always easy. I noticed I had to produce multiple versions of essays and other assignments before they were acceptable for submission. And like I shared with you, I noticed that I struggled to attach words to concepts. My marks did not necessarily reflect the effort that I put in. However, despite all of this, I passed. And at age 45, I fulfilled my lifelong dream of earning a graduate degree. By this time, we had relocated to Ontario, and it seemed like another great job for me. And then 1 year into my new job, I noticed a wide range of reactions to me. This was exacerbated at times by sensory overload, what I would later learn to be a huge lack of self-awareness and an underlying lack of self-esteem, which I think you understand has followed me. Going back to those experiences rooted in childhood. That included mistreatment and bullying. I constantly welcomed and received feedback from my supervisors and from my colleagues. I shifted and modified my behavior accordingly, and I committed to continuous self-improvement. Despite all this, my vulnerabilities were detected and frankly, at times exploited. And this left me feeling as if my rights as a human being didn't matter because I was different. So perhaps no surprise to you, my mental health deteriorated, especially the end of 2016, winter of 2017, to the point that by the spring of 2017, I had a complete breakdown at work. Our younger son was diagnosed with autism on May 24th, 2017. And at a previously scheduled appointment the next day, I asked my family physician for my own psychological assessment, explaining, I think I have it too. And 2 months later, July 25th, I received diagnoses of autism, PTSD, generalized anxiety, and anxiety related to the autism. So I officially became a member of the neurodiverse population, meaning due to a naturally occurring condition, I have a different brain makeup from my neurotypical peers. And along with dyslexics and individuals with ADHD and other neurodivergent minds, I am part of this group that is approximately 15% of the population worldwide. And our conditions are not limited to any race, ethnicity, or gender. And this diagnosis put me on a journey of self-discovery. And I want you to know that I sought workplace accommodation, and instead I lost my job. And this put me truly on a path of committing to living myself and my life as what I call as real Wanda. So this is according to my own values and principles. And part of it is telling my story like I am with you here this morning. And I do this largely because I want to help create a smoother path for others. And as an example of telling my story, an article about my undiagnosed autism ran in Broadview magazine, April 2020, in time for Autism Acceptance Month. And a modified version of that article ran in Reader's Digest last fall in Canada, and then it ran in the USA in the September issue of Reader's Digest this September. Another part of life as real Wanda is entrepreneurship. And my Liberty Co firm, as Rowan mentioned, is focused on increasing the participation level of the neurodiverse population with a special emphasis on autism due to my own diagnosis at midlife. And the vast majority of the neurodiverse population is either unemployed or underemployed, despite our skills and talents. And I want the opportunity for work to be available to every member of the neurodiverse population. And within the workplace, I want a smoother path for others, especially my fellow neurodiverse population members. And that's why I'm advocating towards greater avenues of idea. And by that, I mean, I've learned to add an A for accessibility to inclusion, diversity, and equity frameworks, practices, and programs. Because if we're truly going to have inclusive, diverse, and equitable workplaces, we also need accessible workplaces, meaning they're reachable, enterable, and approachable for everyone. And this also means including for your different brain makeup. And traditionally, I acknowledge that perhaps we've traditionally thought about accessibility from the standpoint of physical disability and removing barriers to physical access to make venues reachable, enterable, and approachable. But given the majority of disabilities are invisible, such as in my case, We need to provoke new thinking about accessibility. And in a wider sense, we need to provoke new thinking about disability as a dimension of diversity. Because along with a range of racial, social, and ethnic backgrounds and differences in genders and sexual orientations, sits disability as a dimension of diversity. And within that, neurodiversity as a dimension of disability and diversity. And this is something I highlight whenever given the opportunity. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to highlight this with you this morning. And I always say it's never a matter of taking anything away. Race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, these are all critical components of of diversity. And so I'm never asking to take one or any of them away. It's a matter of adding disability and within that neurodiversity. And I see this as especially urgent coming out of COVID-19. If there is a silver lining that has emerged through the pandemic for equity-seeking groups, it is that the spotlight has been shone on system weaknesses and overall inequity, and this includes for the disability population and neurodiverse population. And the spotlight has also been shone on the possibilities for equity-seeking groups, such as the disability and neurodiverse populations. And frankly, there's no going back because we have proven what can be done. Specifically, many of the supports, especially around work communication and working relationships, and those are really some of the areas where the neurodiverse population needs supports. So many of these supports that play to neurodiverse talent are ones that were put in place seemingly overnight, when much of the workforce moved to home offices due to COVID-19. For example, varying supervisory communication styles depending on the forum, increased technological supports, and flexibility in terms of location and hours. Some of these accommodations had been championed by disability advocates for years, and in fact, in some cases, decades, and they were denied because they were perceived as too costly or inconvenient. And we now know they can be put in place. There's no going back. There's no saying no. We know they can be put in place. And beyond knowing they can be put in place, they're being recognized for what they're truly meant to enable. And that's playing to employee strengths and allowing for the highest levels of productivity. And what is really interesting is that what employers often put in place in terms of supports for one person or group yields much wider benefit. So for example, subtitles in PowerPoint, created for people with hearing challenges, also enable people who work in their second language. And they can also aid members of the neurodiverse population who may appreciate that reinforcement during a presentation as means of helping to focus on what is being said. And I can attest that this is really helpful for me. And the value of doing all this has evidenced itself because employees continue to work, they continue to contribute to the economy and society at large. So the business case for inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible workplaces, hard fought by so many for so long, is now set to stand on its own. So I think by now you've probably tapped in that I'm pretty passionate about neurodiverse workplace accessibility and inclusion. And within that, I'm particularly committed to inclusive leadership, neurodiverse entrepreneurship as a pathway for employment, and employee retention, and all of these at the intersection of gender. So in terms of inclusive leadership, I say that neurodiverse talent belongs at all levels of organizations, sectors, and fields, from the boardroom to the C-suite to the office cubicle. Neurodiverse talent can flourish when our abilities and aptitudes are appreciated and matched with organizational goals and priorities. As I mentioned, I do see entrepreneurship as an employment pathway for the neurodiverse population. However, I'm helping to ensure that entrepreneurship is a choice, that the neurodiverse population is pulled into entrepreneurship because it is a choice and not because they are pushed out of the workplace due to ableism and other forms of discrimination. This is why I'm particularly committed to avenues for employee retention. So what am I doing? I'm working with boards, organizational leadership, workplace teams, and members of the workplace at large to increase awareness of what neurodiversity is, why it is important to understand, what hiring and retaining neurodiverse talent entails, how it fits into any idea strategy, and why neurodiversity is a workplace asset, including through inclusive leadership. And I'm pleased to share that I feel it's actually a great time to be doing this. And one of the reasons why it's a great time is because I see that people are beginning to listen. So employers and employees are really beginning to listen to the importance of neurodiverse inclusion. For example, I read an article just last month that speaks to how the onus is shifting. So the onus has always been on the neurodivergent individual to shift and modify and adapt. However, we're starting to see a change, and instead of all the responsibility being on the neurodivergent individual, that responsibilities is starting to move to employees in the workplace so that neurodiverse talent can thrive and flourish. And a quote for you that I pulled is that, in other words, with understanding colleagues and a flexible work culture, neurodiverse individuals can reach the potential and be recognized as highly valuable employees. So, given this is the emphasis of my work, do I sometimes wish I had received my diagnosis earlier? And the short answer to that question is yes. However, what I really try to focus on is that it's better late than never. And frankly, I'm grateful that I received my diagnosis in my lifetime, because underdiagnosis persists across the spectrum of neurodiversity, especially among girls and women. And that is one of the reasons, and Rowan shared, that I do participate in neurodiverse research whenever I can. And I'm particularly committed to research into autistic women's experiences in the workforce. And as an autistic woman who has been employed throughout her career, I realize I'm actually one of the lucky ones. The majority of the autistic population mirrors that of the neurodiverse population and the disability population worldwide, meaning that we're either unemployed or underemployed. And this is a real shame, because we are unable to make the contribution that we want to make. And again, I'm doing what I'm doing because I want to help bring forward positive action and change. And in terms of my mental health, my diagnosis has really helped me develop a level of self-awareness that I didn't have. And frankly, I didn't even know this level of self-awareness was possible. And the benefits are almost impossible to exaggerate. And I actually say that I see self-awareness as the greatest gift you can give yourself. I wonder how many other Wandas are out there, and I want to help ensure the positive effects that I felt are more available for others. And the self-awareness has led me to a level of self-assurance, again, that I didn't even know was possible. And it's helping enable me to be a proud autism mom, modeling for my children to be ashamed, unafraid, and undeterred. And I realize that as I'm saying all of this to you, and in all the work that I do, I have to be cognizant that I'm doing it as a straight white woman with a disability. And although I've experienced discrimination, negative stereotypes, and stigma, there are barriers that I haven't experienced because I'm a straight white woman. So Black autistics, racialized autistics, Indigenous autistics, and LGBTQ2+ community member autistics experience barriers that I do not. And that is a reason why I actually see it as a responsibility to take my privilege, and because of my privilege, the platform I have, to help create a smoother path for others. So if you're detecting a tone of optimism and hope, it's because I am hopeful and optimistic. And there's a number of reasons for that. And one is that there's a lot happening globally and nationally in terms of disability rights and disability justice. And I'd like to highlight a few for you. For example, the launch of the We 15 campaign just before the Tokyo Paralympics held this summer. The campaign is centered on change for the 15% of us worldwide who have a disability. And at a time when diversity and inclusion are receiving more and more attention, this global movement is publicly campaigning for disability visibility, inclusion, and accessibility. And the Valuable 500 was a founding member of the We 15 campaign. And one of the calls to action is the Inclusion Revolution, that hashtag that Rowan mentioned that I do like to speak and write under. It's a worldwide movement launched in 2018 to spearhead broader thinking, especially about disability and disability employment. And the Valuable 500 is revolutionizing disability inclusion through business leadership and opportunity. And it is named the Valuable 500 because the leaders have secured commitment from 500 private sector corporations to put disability employment on the highest decision-making agendas of their organizations. Because the majority of the disability population worldwide, and included in that, the majority of the neurodiverse population, cannot remain unemployed or underemployed. And frankly, we're not going to remain underemployed and unemployed because for a whole host of reasons, including it's the ignoring our potential, and we have great potential because of our skills and talents. And something that's happening within neurodiversity, the Institute of Neurodiversity, a global charity helping to ensure the world is truly ready to embrace neurodiversity. And it just launched officially on Friday, last Friday, the 15th. UK executive Charlotte Valor is helping to lead the Institute of Neurodiversity. And Charlotte is championing all of this through her lived experience as a woman who has publicly shared her autism diagnosis received at the age of 50. And within Canada, I'd like to highlight the federal government's 50-30 challenge. The goal of the program is to challenge Canadian organizations to increase the representation and inclusion of diverse groups within various sectors. It is open to all organizations and has 3 streams. One is corporate, another is small and medium enterprises, and another is post-secondary institutions, not-for-profits, and charities. And it's centered on 2 goals. One is 50% gender parity, I should say, on Canadian boards and senior management. And the other is significant representation on Canadian boards and senior management of other underrepresented groups, including racialized, including persons with disabilities, including invisible, such as neurodiversity, and LGBTQ2+ community members and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Over 1,300 organizations have agreed to participate in the 50-30 challenge, and perhaps no surprise to you, I have enlisted Liberty Co. And so in conclusion, I'm asking of you what I ask of every audience I speak with, and that is, in this post-Me Too era of Black Lives Matter and Indigenous reconciliation with disability justice as the burgeoning social movement, will you join the inclusion revolution? Thank you, and I'm looking forward to our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Wanda. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your lived experience, for providing valuable information regarding women and neurodiversity, because it's so often overlooked. And like you said, people are getting diagnosed much later because of masking. And I think it's something that needs to be talked about far more. Thank you for, discussing employment for persons with disabilities and the impact of the inclusion revolution. Our hope is that conversations like this one and presentations like this one continue to reach people, creating connections among business owners and communities, so that, more awareness is provided. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for the opportunity, especially during Disability Employment Awareness Month.